Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be taking a look at BT-05, and BT-05 gives us a lot of new and powerful tools to upgrade and update some current and existing decks. And one of those decks is going to be the UlforceVeedramon deck. So UlforceVeedramon is a very powerful Digimon in his own right. The whole idea of the deck is to just utilize him to just swing as many times as you possibly can based on how many Tamers you have out. And that's still just looking to be very, very powerful because the turn you bring him out is the turn you're going to try to swing as much as you possibly can to try to close out the game with. And the only unfortunate thing about UlforceVeedramon is that he just gets outshined by InheritAble because InheritAble is doing a very similar style of thing, just a little bit simpler to perform. So just that simplicity makes InheritAble a more desirable deck, just because it doesn't require as much work or effort, but still we have a lot of new and powerful cards to be working with thanks to BT-05 to make Ulforce even stronger than he was before. So going over the deck, starting with the Digitama, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Upamon. So Upamon is going to be the main Digitama of the deck just because this is acting as a really good draw engine. So what this card is doing is it has a nice when attacking ability of once per turn. If the opponent has a Digimon in play with no Digivolution sources in it, then we get to draw 1 card. So that's just a pretty decent and pretty good generic way of drawing cards, and drawing cards is good because it helps with the overall consistency of the deck, so we run Upamon. And then as far as the 5th Digitama, it could really be almost anything you feel like you want it to be. I'm going to be using 1 copy of DemiVeemon from BT2-002, just because DemiVeemon has this really nice inheritable ability of during your turn, once per turn, when this Digimon becomes unsuspended during your main phase, then it gets plus 1000 DP. So Blue doesn't really have a whole lot of ways of DP boosting, so the fact that we do have a Digitama to help DP boost our Digimon is looking to be really, really good. Next, on to the rookies, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Veemon. So this is the BT-03 version of Veemon, and this Veemon is really good because he has the native ability of jamming. So that means when he attacks into the opponent's security, if it's a security Digimon, then he's just going to auto-win the fight. And we could use this card to pressure the opponent really early on to try to decrease their security as quickly as we possibly can. So that way, when we go into Ulforce and we try to combo out with Ulforce, he's going to have that much easier of a time closing out the game, thus making this Veemon a really good card to be playing with. Next, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Strabimon. So Strabimon is a really good Digimon for this deck because he has this nice on-play ability where we get to check the top 3 cards of our deck and add 1 Digimon with hybrid in its form and or 1 blue tamer from among them into our hand, and then the rest go to the bottom. So this is really good because we are going to be playing around with a whole bunch of different tamers, and we do have a little bit of hybrid support, not a whole lot, but the idea is we're going to be using Strabimon to dig for our tamers, so that way we could try to play our tamers and see them as consistently as we possibly can. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Bulucomon. So Bulucomon is a pretty decent Digimon because he has this nice inheritable ability where during your turn, once per turn, when you trash one of the opponent's Digivolution sources, then you get to gain 1 memory. So trashing the opponent's Digivolution sources is going to be a sub-theme for this deck, so anytime we're going to be doing that, gaining 1 memory just allows us to enhance and extend some of our plays, thus making Bulucomon really good. And as such, I'm also going to be running 4 copies of Goemon. This is kind of a flex spot. It doesn't necessarily have to be Goemon. It could be anything you want. But I feel like just having the consistency on the ability of gaining 1 memory for trashing the opponent's inheritable sources is still really, really good to be playing around with because, again, it makes our cards that much more efficient when we're trying to go for the sub-strategy. Next, onto the level 4s, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Lobomon. So Lobomon is a really fantastic Digimon for this deck to be running because we are going to be playing lots of blue tamers, and he has the nice ability where you could Digivolve this card from your hand on top of one of your blue tamers as if it was a level 3 Digimon. So this is just another really good way of trying to close out the game, where if you just swing all out with your Ulforce will hopefully gain you a whole bunch of memory, then you could utilize said memory to just Digivolve one of your tamers that's unsuspended into Lobomon to try to swing for the final swing. So he's just looking to be another really good card to just combo with the deck to try to help close out games. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Coelamon. So Coelamon is going to be the dedicated blocker of the deck. If you wanted to, you could run Grizzlymon in its place. It doesn't necessarily matter. He's just there to fulfill the blocker role. I just prefer Coelamon just because he has this nice Evo for 1, which allows you to be really tempo efficient with him, where Grizzlymon, even though he does have more DP and is less susceptible to be removed, he does Evo for 2, so you are sacrificing a little bit of tempo for a slightly stronger card, but again, this is just the blocker slot of the deck. And then the last champion of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Veedramon 0. So Veedramon 0 is a pretty interesting card. This is kind of another flex card where it could really be anything you want. I just like what Veedramon 0 is doing just because he has this nice native when attacking ability, where if we have a blue tamer, we could trash the top 3 cards of our deck to give this Digimon plus 2000 DP for the turn. So he could swing for 7,000, which could be very relevant, and then on top of that, he also has another ability, which is an inheritable ability, where he has a when attacking ability, not limited to once per turn. You could place 3 non-Digi-Egg cards from your trash to the bottom of your deck to draw 1 card. So I really do like what Veedramon 0 is doing, mostly against the security control type of matchup, where if you know the opponent's going to try to grind you out, Veedramon 0 can just help prevent that by allowing you to have a way to not only just draw cards, but put cards back to the bottom of your deck. So that's the real main reason why I'm running Veedramon 0, is just for that matchup, but being able to draw cards and have a really decent level 4 Digimon is still just really good, which is why I prefer him. Next, on to the ultimates, I'm going to be running 4 copies of AeroVeedramon. So AeroVeedramon is a really good card to be running because he has this nice when Digivolving ability, where if we have a blue tamer in play, then we get to unsuspend one of our blue Digimon. So this is really powerful because it's not specifically stating any other requirements on the Digimon other than it has to be blue. So we could use this to unsuspend one of our Digimon for an extra attack, and that extra attack could make or break games a lot of the time. So I really do like what AeroVeedramon is doing, but he also has a nice inheritable ability, which is the primary reason why we're playing the card, where when this Digimon becomes unsuspended during your main phase, it gains the jamming ability. So this is what's really important because we're going to be trying to swing multiple times with our Ulforce, and AeroVeedramon is going to reward us for doing that by allowing our Digimon to have jamming, so that way he's going to ensure his survival when attacking into the opponent's security. And then the last ultimate of the deck is going to be 3 copies of CrysPaledramon. So CrysPaledramon is another really good Digimon to be running. He's mostly there to support the sub-theme of attacking the opponent's inheritable sources, so that way we could try to gain some memory in some very important and powerful ways, because he has this nice when Digivolving ability where we get to trash the bottom Digivolution source off of all of the opponent's Digimon. So that's really good. If they're going wide, it could just pick off all of them. Even at worst, it's just getting rid of 1, which we only need to get rid of 1 to try to trigger some of the abilities, but trying to have the opponent have a Digimon with no Digivolution sources is just really good for some of our other cards. On top of which, he also has his own inheritable ability, where during your turn, while the opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it in play, then this Digimon gains security attack +1. This is just really good because if the idea is we're going to be swinging multiple times with our Ulforce, then giving our Ulforce security attack +1 is looking to be pretty powerful, because if we're able to line up even just 2 to 3 swings, that's all of the opponent's security if we didn't attack into it previously. If we did attack into it previously, it could actually decide the game. So the security attack +1 is a pretty relevant ability to be having, so between all of that is why I'm running CrysPaledramon. Next up, onto the Megas, I'm going to be running 4 copies of UlforceVeedramon. So UlforceVeedramon is going to be the main Mega and the star of the deck, and what this card is doing is he has 2 very powerful abilities. His first ability is during your turn, when one of your blue Tamers becomes suspended, then you get to unsuspend this Digimon. So this is what's allowing him to get multiple attacks because it's not once per turn, so every single time one of your Tamers is going to be suspending, we get to unsuspend him, and with a couple of our different Tamers to suspend themselves, then we could kind of pace it and time it so that way we could get as many attacks off with Ulforce as possible. And then on top of that, he has another ability where during your turn, once per turn, when this Digimon becomes unsuspended during your main phase, then you get to gain 1 memory. So even if we just have 1 Tamer on the field, that could be good enough depending on what our stack is and what the other cards we're playing around with are. So just being able to use the second ability to just generically gain us 1 additional memory is very, very good because it allows us to enhance and extend some of our plays. So this just is what's making Ulforce very, very powerful, and he's still really good, even though he does require a little bit of setup. I think given the way the game currently is, it's not necessarily the hardest thing in the world to have at least 1 to 2 to maybe 3 Tamers out on the field and still have enough time to win the game. And then as far as the supporting mega of the deck goes, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Hexeblaumon. So Hexeblaumon is a pretty good supporting mega just because he's acting as another aggro tool, because he himself can gain jamming off of his when attacking ability, and then on top of which his other ability could act as some extra defense. So what this card is doing in total is he has a nice when attacking ability where we get to trash up to 2 of the bottom 2 Digivolution sources off of one of the opponent's Digimon. Then if an opponent's Digimon in play has no Digivolution sources, then he'll gain the jamming ability. So this is pretty good just because he's going to be attacking the opponent's inheritable sources, making sure that their Digimon don't have any, and then when they don't have any, he's going to have jamming, and then that plays off of his second ability where during all turns, your opponent's Digimon with no Digivolution sources can't attack or block. So this is really good because it could help stave off some of the opponent's aggression, and it also can turn off some of their defenses. So that just makes Hexeblaumon really good, and if you have the dream team of Hexeblaumon and Ulforce on the field at the same time, that's just looking to be very powerful, all depending on what the board state is currently looking like, because you could use the combination of the 2 of them to try to close out the game with, and again, that's just looking to be pretty strong. And then as far as the last mega of the deck and only level 7 of the deck, I'm just going to be running 2 copies of Omnimon. So this is the Omnimon from BT-05, and this Omnimon is really good because of everything this card is doing. So his first ability is a when digivolving ability of Blitz, so that allows you to attack even when the memory goes over onto the opponent's side. So that's looking to be really good because, again, it's another aggro tool to just try to help close out the game with. And then on top of that, he also has another when digivolving ability of unsuspending this Digimon. So that way we could use whatever mega we used to swing with to unsuspend it, digivolving into Omnimon, allowing us to then use the Blitz ability to get 1 additional attack out of it. So that could help close out games alone just between the 2 when digivolving abilities. And then on top of that, he has another ability where if we're unable to close out the game, then he has an all turns ability where if an opponent's card effect would delete him or return him to the hand or deck, then we could prevent it by trashing one of the level 6s from his inheritable sources. So this is really good because if we can't close out the game, he has some form of built-in protection to try to stop the opponent from getting rid of him, so that way he could apply constant pressure onto the opponent. So between everything this card is doing, he is just looking to be very powerful for this deck, especially as a good game finisher. Next, on to the options, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Hammerspark. So Hammerspark is Hammerspark. It's really good because we could just gain the memory to do whatever we want with, to enhance and extend some of our plays with. And then it also has the nice security ability of gaining 2 memory, which is effectively taking 2 memory away from the opponent, which it could make or break a lot of their plays. So Hammerspark is still one of the best blue options we have to be playing around with, so that's why we run it at 4. Next, on to the Tamers, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Davis. So Davis is going to be the deck's dedicated memory fixing tamer. This could be Matt from BT-01 if you really felt like you wanted it just for the memory fixing tamer and the possibility of having another tamer to suspend himself. But I feel like what Davis is doing is still super important just because he has this nice on-play ability where we get to check the top 3 cards of our deck and add 1 blue and 1 green Digimon from among them into our hand, then the rest go to the bottom. Obviously, we're not playing any green Digimon, so at worst, this is always just going to be gaining us a blue Digimon, and that's just helping with the overall consistency of the deck, on top of which it's going to be allowing us to have a tamer that doesn't suspend himself, so he is a really good target for Lobomon to, again, just help close out the game with. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Sora and Joe. So Sora and Joe is a new tamer in BT-05, and this tamer is really powerful because it's another tamer that can suspend itself, thus comboing with Ulforce, and what this tamer is doing is just really good as a whole. So it has the nice ability where at the start of your turn, if your opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it in play, then we get to gain 2 memory. And then this ability does stack if we have multiple Sora and Joes out, so the more Sora and Joes we have out, the more memory we're going to have at the start of our turn, especially if we have a memory fixing tamer also paired up with this, then we get to start our turn with a lot of memory, and we could use that memory in some very powerful ways to try to close out the game because we are an aggro style deck. And then on top of that, Sora and Joe has another really good ability, which is the ability that's comboing with Ulforce and Hexeblaumon, so it's kind of acting as that bridge for those two Digimon, where when you attack with one of your blue Digimon, you get to suspend this tamer to trash up to 2 of the opponent's Digivolution sources on one of their Digimon. So this is really good just because, again, it's acting as that bridge where it's attacking the inheritable sources to try to trigger our various abilities where we want to trash the inheritable sources or make sure the Digimon doesn't have any inheritable sources, and it's also suspending itself. So both of those things are just comboing with both of our megas, which is why the deck is built and is playing the way it is. And then the last tamer of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Tai Chi V Tamer. So Tai Chi V Tamer is a pretty decent tamer to be running just because he's a very efficient tamer to just hard play, just because he has a low play cost of 2, and then on top of which he has this nice main ability where we can only trigger it if we have a card with Veedramon in its name on our field. We could suspend this tamer to do one of the following actions. So we could either draw a card, or we could either give one of our Digimon plus 1000 DP for the turn. So both of those things are pretty decent. Drawing cards is always good because it helps with the overall consistency of the deck, but if we don't feel like we need to draw cards, then we have the option to just give one of our Digimon plus 1000 DP, and this is really good because we don't need specifically Ulforce on the field in order to use this card. We could use it with AeroVeedramon, or we could use it with Veedramon 0, or any other Veedramon cards that we could be playing. So he's just really good just because he has all of that synergy built into him for the deck. And then there's just a ton of different cards that you could think about running and playing, all depending on what you want to gain out of the deck. So if you wanted to, you could double down on some jamming synergy because we are already running lots of different ways of gaining and using jamming. So DemiVeemon is a good way of using that jamming as a Digitama to try to help us draw some cards. And we even do have a Veedramon that could gain the jamming ability, so we could use this in some very different ways on top of him being a Veedramon. And on top of that, we also have other generic V synergy and V support because we have Rena as a tamer to be playing around with to help dig out our V cards and to DP boost our Digimon, which is already pretty good. And some of the other V cards that we could be running are going to be Veemon to try to gain some additional attacks off of our lower level Digimon. We have Veemon from BT-02 to try to help draw cards when we unsuspend our Digimon. And we have Veedramon from BT-01, the secret era version, to just natively have the ability to multi-attack and to have a nice inheritable ability of permanently DP boosting our Digimon by 1000, which could matter quite a lot. Then, if you want, you could play around with going heavier into attacking the opponent's inheritable sources. So we have Matt as a good memory-fixing tamer to do that, on top of which he also could suspend himself by allowing us to hard play our Digimon to trash his source off of the opponent's Digimon. So that's looking to be pretty good as a tamer. Then we have Bulucomon as a good Digitama to help support that because its when attacking ability isn't limited to once per turn. So we could pick off the inheritable sources of the opponent's low-level Digimon. Then we have Paledramon, and by extension, we have the starter deck Garurumon and Gabumon that we could think about as other good ways of picking off the opponent's inheritable sources. And we even have Absolute Blast as a good card to just try to help control the field and remove inheritable sources at the same time. Then we have a whole bunch of other tempo-efficient cards that we could be running. So you could think about running Elecmon, you could think about running Tobiomon and by extension Gorillamon, and you could even think about running Monzimon and by extension Bastimon as all very good tempo-efficient cards to be running if you're just going for that turbo strategy. Then we also have some other really good cards and support packages that you could think about playing. So you could use Makagaugamon to act as a really good card to try to bounce the opponent's level 4 Digimon back to their hand with the Digiburst ability. So most of the time this is going to be on their blocker, or even if it's not on their blocker, it's just good to get rid of a Digimon off the field to stop some aggression. And this allows us to aggress even easier because of getting rid of that potential blocker and his inheritable ability of just giving our Digimon plus 2000 DP as long as we have a Tamer in play. So there's that synergy there, and we also have synergy with the Gao package as a whole, just because we could use Mirage Gaugamon because he could be a very cheap Mega to Digivolve up into. He's unblockable, so he could help close out games because they can't stop him, even if they do have a blocker on the field. And the fact that we also have Thomas to just interact with the fact that Thomas is going to rest himself to unsuspend Mirage Gaugamon to just to get that multiple attacks off, paired up with Ulforce on the field. That could be a lot of potential attacks. Or if you want to go for something a little bit more simplistic, you could just cut all of that and just run Metal Garurumon as a good supporting Mega, just because he naturally has the ability to attack twice himself. And we even have some other level 7s you could think about running as a more control style of level 7. So you could run Omnimon for his when Digivolving ability to delete the opponent's Digimon and all other Digimon with the same name. And after that, if he sticks on the field, then he could attack twice because of his when attacking ability. Or you could just run Omnimon X Antibody just because this card can stop some of the opponent's aggression by just trashing your own inheritable sources to stop attacks, and his when attacking ability is really powerful to just delete anything that's basically weaker than him. And then we have some other really good options you could consider running. So the Ray of Victory is another really good option that you could run just to try to help control and mitigate some of the opponent's field. It is unfortunate that is on level 5 or lower Digimon that it's bouncing, but it also has the upside where you could unsuspend one of your Digimon, which may or may not matter, because if you're using this with a blocker on the field, then it could unsuspend the blocker during the opponent's turn, and that could be pretty brutal and devastating. Or you could use this aggressively to bounce one of the opponent's Digimon back to their hand if we have enough memory, and get an extra attack out of our Digimon that way. So it's looking to be pretty good on its level of utility. And if you just want to run, again, something simpler and a little bit more powerful and consistent, you could just run Cocytus Breath to just bounce anything back to the opponent's hand. So, as I mentioned before, there's just a ton of different things that you could do with the deck, all depending on how you want to support the deck and what cards you want to be playing with. So I don't think that Ulforce is a bad deck, especially in the context of the raising meta, where you're just going to be hiding your Mega level Digimon in your raising anyway and bring it out when you feel like you're ready. So Ulforce kind of just naturally fits that playstyle already, and it allows you to buy time to just use your low-end cards to aggress early or set up your Tamers, so that way you can make him as efficient as you possibly can. I do think he's not necessarily the greatest deck in the world to be playing. He's definitely not tier 1, but he's still a really decent and really fun Digimon to be playing around with that is going to be getting support in the new starter deck and in the future. So he's definitely not a card to be slept on, and this is definitely a deck that's going to be a really fun and interesting deck to be playing around with for the time being. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.